Studies program. I see all kinds of new faces here today. I think there's a lot of Portuguese undergrad students in here today, I think, which is wonderful. So thanks for coming, you guys. For those of you who are not familiar with our program, we do have a listserv where we send out a weekly email update kind of telling you about all the events both on and off campus having to do with the Latin American, Caribbean, and Iberian region. So you're welcome to sign up for the listserv there on the corner, and we'll put you on our list. So please, feel free to have food and drinks. We're going to put out a few more cookies and granola bars and stuff because the sandwiches are running out. So thanks for coming, and I'll turn it over to Severina Albuquerque.
Thank you, Sarah. I'll be brief, and I'll start with an invitation for those of you who are not planning on attending the Nebraska game on Saturday at 7 p.m. We are showing a Portuguese film called Os Mistérios de Lisboa, The Mysteries of Lisbon, directed by a master of the cinema called Raul Ruiz, and the film begins at 7 p.m. in Vilas Hall 7040, was it 47? 47 Vilas Hall, the usual place where the Cinematheque films are shown. And then I'd like to call your attention, both undergrad and grad students, to the existence of this award, the Joaquim Nabuco Award, that is given annually by the Brazil Initiative and Latin American, Caribbean, and Iberian Studies. And you have the description here, or you can visit the website of the Brazil Initiative. It's very easy. It's brazil.wis.edu, and then you can visit and navigate the site with information. We've had this is the second year we've given the awards, and we have two winners. I will go ahead and introduce both, and then they will speak 15 to 20 minutes each, and then at the end we'll have questions for the two of them. So the first speaker will be Giso Broman, who transferred here in 2009 to study geography, but added Portuguese right away as a second major after completing the 2009 Summer Intensive Portuguese Institute. He received the undergraduate class or foreign language and area studies scholarship. It's another thing that you guys should be aware of, that these scholarships for the study of less commonly taught languages initially were only for graduate students, but now they are also for undergrads. And I believe that Giso got, if not the first, one of the first, the first on campus. So another first for Giso. He graduated in May of 2011 and started the master's degree program this fall at the School of Library and Information Science Studies here at the UW. He works at the UW Digital Collection Center in Memorial Library and is now also an assistant to Professor Holly Gibbs, who is a new faculty member in geography, our colleague beginning this year. He has ongoing research with a project that focuses on environmental issues in Brazil. The title of Giso's presentation will be The Diversion of the São Francisco River, Lack of Water and Lack of Democracy. The second speaker is Ian Carillo, who has in common with Giso the fact that he too is a graduate of the Summer Intensive Portuguese Institute. Ian just completed it this past summer, and then went to Brazil immediately, just days after finishing, for his field research. Ian has an MA from the Center for Latin American Studies at the University of Kansas, and is now a second-year PhD student in the Development Studies program here at UW. He is interested in economic development in Latin America and has done research on commercialized microfinance in Mexico, industrial policy in Brazil, and changes in household consumption in Brazil. The title of Ian's presentation is Industrialization and Commodities in Brazil, the case of BNDES. So without further ado, I'll give the floor to
Thank you. Well, first of all, I need to say what an honor it is to have received this prestigious award. I'm very glad to have done so, and I need to thank a few people specifically. First of all, I need to acknowledge the generosity of Dona Bibi Nabuco, Joaquin Nabuco's granddaughter, who provided financial support for this award. And also thank the committee who chose my paper, Luis Madureira, Alberto Vargas, Steve Smith, and Gay Seidman, who is not here, I believe. Also, Sarah Ripp and the rest of the staff of LASIS for setting up these lunchtime lecture series talks. And finally, well, everyone that I didn't name also involved in the Division of International Studies, the Latin American, Caribbean, Iberian Studies program, as well as the Brazil Initiative, especially Severino Albuquerque, the director of the Brazil Initiative, for his tireless work coordinating this award and so many other wonderful opportunities here at UW to study Brazil and take part in different programs and projects going on at the university. Also, Professor, I would like to thank you for suggesting the topic of this paper to me in your Brazilian Civilization class, Portuguese 362. And I'd like to give all of the undergrads here especially, but any of the students who are thinking about taking a class with Professor Albuquerque, I'd like to give them a little bit of advice. If Severino says this would make a good topic for a paper, write it down in big block letters, because it might get you here. Let me set this up real quick and we'll dive into the diversion of the São Francisco River. In Portuguese, the word is a transposição do Rio São Francisco, and I'll get to exactly what that means in just a couple of slides. But basically, what this project that Brazil is now doing comprises of is taking water from the São Francisco River and diverting it north, thousands of kilometers through a series of canals into the Sertão, the arid northeastern section of Brazil. First, I'll give you an outline of this controversial topic, give you some context, the physical landscape, the political geography, some cultural factors that are at play in the region, as well as touch on the environmental impact, as well as opposition, protests that happen against the government's plan, and try to touch a little bit on the current situation and where we're going forward with this. Eventually. Here we go. So Brazil, as I'm sure most of you know, is roughly the same size as the lower 48 states of the United States. And it has one iconic river that captures all of our imagination, the Amazon. And this picture, this very bad picture, is something that I took out the airplane window because I was so excited to be flying over the Amazon. So I think this is sort of indicative of how we're all sort of in awe of the Amazon. But there's another river in Brazil, the longest river that is completely within the boundaries of Brazil, that runs from here. Well, it runs from here, technically, bad geography student. It runs from Minas Gerais through Bahia, and then between Bahia and Pernambuco, and out by Sergipe and Maceió, right in here, Alagoas, excuse me. So that's where I'm talking about. The Amazon basically, of course, covers all of this and is very lush and green, and we all know that. But just a short distance away is the Sertão, which is very, very different from the Amazon and is the whole reason for this project. Here's a precipitation map and some basic figures about the river that I'm talking about. You can see that down in Minas Gerais, that's basically what this is, if you can get your bearings, and Bahia is right here. The precipitation is rather high. It's not a really wet area by any means, but as you go further north, it becomes extremely dry. And this is where the river begins. So this is that part of Minas Gerais where they do get some precipitation that supports, lush green trees, etc. I wanted to make a quick aside. I mainly included this photo because it's so beautiful, and also to call your attention to the little markings that I have at the bottom. SFV is São Francisco Vivo. It's a website where I pulled a lot of these photos. So if you see that, you'll be able to see a lot more of these same type of photos that show all of the river. So the Sertão, the two main terms that we need to understand. Transposição, from the verb transpor, I already touched on a little bit, just basically means to transport or divert or move. There's not a really good English translation. And the Sertão came from, I've heard and I've read that originally was from desertão, like a big desert, but it has since taken on the meaning of not only just the interior of a country or of the country, but in Brazil, it's sort of synonymous with this arid and remote area. The Sertão has the highest concentration of poverty in Brazil and includes not only parts of Bahia, Pernambuco, Alagoas that I've already mentioned, but also neighboring states of Paraíba, Rio Grande do Norte, Ceará, Piauí. This image is from some date in the past. I guess I didn't mark it down. But I put this beautiful black and white photo up to talk a little bit about the persistent problem of drought in the Sertão. There were horrible droughts in 1877, 1879, and then throughout the 20th century, most notably, again, almost 100 years after those first droughts of the 1870s, in the late 1970s, that spurred the Brazilian government to think about an idea that they had already been thinking about since before the time of independence. Starting with Dom João VI, around the time of Napoleon in 1818, that gives you some idea. They had already started talking about taking water from this river further south and diverting it into these arid regions. But the technology was woefully inadequate for doing anything of the sort until that period in the late 70s, when again they were faced with severe drought, death, horrible situations, and started talking more seriously about doing this because the technology had come. The area has a very diverse population. If you know anything about the history of Brazil, you know about the quilombos, the escaped slave communities that are all along the northeastern interior. So there are over 150 quilombos along the area that will be affected by this project. And there are also dozens of indigenous communities, notably the Trucá and Pancararu. I should mention here too that the indigenous populations in Brazil refer to the river as Opará. And there's also sort of a folk name for the Rio São Francisco, which is Velho Chico. This is only to demonstrate that there obviously are a lot of real-world reasons why people honor this river. They depend on it for food. There are at least 180 species of fish in the Rio São Francisco, and 10% of them are estimated to be endangered. People also need drinking water for daily use. Anything that you can imagine people would need water for in an arid region such as this, the river is very important to the people that actually live near that river. So this is all to preview sort of some of the opposition that's going to come to this project. And as you might expect also, there's a great deal of pollution in certain parts of the river. So to back up for a second, the basic opposition to this plan is that the river has problems that need to be addressed. And the rallying cry behind that is basically, we need to revitalize the river rather than transporting all of its water to someplace else, possibly causing further damage, possibly injuring communities that depend on the river for their livelihood. But politically, this is the image of the poor farmer in the Northeast, away from the river, who cannot farm their land because of the lack of rain or access to other clean water for daily use or for farming. And I want to remind you too of the political geography of this area with 7 different states, very small states, each with 2 senators and a governor, all vying for this government project's money and resources, the water itself. They're pushing this image really hard. They're not talking about revitalization. So those are the 2 camps. You've got one, the people who already live at the river saying, what about us? We already live here. And then the political forces saying, we need to spread the wealth, so to speak. And here we can see the governor of Minas Gerais, Antonio Anastasia, at an event called Super Agro. And I think you can imagine that it's probably not really geared towards the small farmer that I just showed you. I think the suit is a pretty good indication, not just the suit that the governor is wearing, but this is, there's the website up above. And I encourage you to go and judge for yourself whether you think that politicians in Brazil are really focused on the small farmer or whether agribusiness has a bigger voice. Another thing that needs to be kept in mind about this project is that in Brazil, especially during the military dictatorship that lasted from 1964 to 1985, there were a number of Pharaonic projects, Projetos Pharaonicos, which is sort of it's definitely the popular name. It's not a name that the government would have come up with. These projects of the pharaohs include the Costa e Silva Bridge that connects Niterói and Rio de Janeiro, but also this Transamazonica, the Trans-Amazonian Highway, which doesn't look like much of a highway at this point in the 90s or 2000s. The government really liked to push these massive projects through on a huge scale because they didn't have, I mean, they were a military dictatorship. They didn't have opposition to it. They did what they wanted to do. So in the case of the bridge, maybe it's a more neutral example, but there's a lot of resentment and resistance and suspicion of large public works projects being pushed through by the government, just because of the history. And so here we go. We have this, the Indian tribe, the Truka, demonstrating against the government going forward with this project. This is in 2004 or 5, I believe. Trying to check if I've got. Okay, so yeah, I've skipped over a lot of the committees and the bureaucracy of getting this from an idea into an actual plan. But by 2001, the government of Brazil had formal environmental impact studies with IBAMA and other projects underway that made it seem like this really was going to happen. And it's peculiar also that when this project came about, it wasn't under a military dictatorship, even though the seeds may have been planted during that period. It was under the government of Lula. And so sort of the main point of my paper is, if you read it, and I'll give you the link at the end, that whether or not there's a democratically elected government in Brazil, these types of projects are pushed from the top down, and there's not a lot of real voice given to the people. They say on paper that they're going to have community meetings, they're going to have environmental impact studies. What actually happened, though, in the case of the San Francisco was that they sent it to the Supreme Court and they overturned things and they plowed through with their plans. And it goes to all of that political power that I spoke about before. The senators and the governors, Lula himself, who is from the Northeast, all ramrodding this through. This gentleman is a Catholic bishop named Luis Flavio Capillo, who went on 2 separate hunger strikes in 2005 and 2007, right as they were getting ready to break ground on this, and the government was breaking a lot of their promises about having meetings with the community and about having environmental. Luis Flavio Capillo. And he continues to be active, an active voice against this project. The environmental impact studies were demanded under Fernando Henrique Cardoso in the mid-90s, actually. And that's another political irony, perhaps, that Lula's rival was the one that said, no, we need to protect the environment and talk to the community. And it was under Lula's government that this all was sort of brushed aside, and they went ahead. They formed a political act, or Programa de Aceleração, that one, Giso, the PAC, which is a big way of raising money for this type of project. So they got private funds and contractors, very similar to how we do this sort of thing in the United States. You get people to bid on it and promise money, and then the government doles it all out. And what ended up happening was that they weren't spending the money that was promised, and so there's all kinds of questions of corruption. And of course, they went ahead, as you can see, and started building in July 2007. It's expected to last for years. I cannot get a solid answer from any reliable source about when the official end date is supposed to be. And I think if I found that, I wouldn't believe it anyway at this point. It's estimated to cost, in the end, up to 20 billion reais. And from the original idea of diverting water, I think just to connect the river here to the river up here, they've added an extra canal and then all of these additional canals. So this is one more indication of that political power at work. Well, this district over here says we want a little piece of the action. We could just build another canal. And so the thing started spreading and growing and becoming more and more expensive and complicated. The Ministry of National Integration continues to maintain the project will benefit 12 million people, with an emphasis on the small rural farms again, although some studies suggest that the final cost will place the cost of water itself out of the hands of these poor people and instead to those larger agribusiness farmers. Now, whether or not this project is ultimately successful and by what measure it is successful, it remains completely to be seen. I think that there will be some benefit to it. I don't know how much that benefit is going to be regulated. I don't know how much the governments of Brazil, maybe another right-wing president will be elected and they'll act more like Fernando Henrique Cardoso did and be more kind to the, I don't know. It's a very confusing issue. But what is definitely true, I think, is that it demonstrates that whether you're talking about left-wing, right-wing, democratically elected or not, this kind of project remains from the top down. And I would also add as an aside that I found a project at the last minute after I'd written this project that is going on at the border of, near Winnipeg, so the border of North Dakota and the United States, or at Canada and the United States, right near Winnipeg, that's doing the same thing, and the US and Canadian governments are acting in much the same way. So it sort of blew my mind that maybe this isn't a Brazilian issue, maybe this is a government issue and a sort of political science issue, I'm not sure, but yeah, if I were Severino right now, I'd say, if you're looking for a graduate student thesis topic, hint, hint, I would jump on this. I'd be happy to help you and share any resources that I have. And I think I'll leave it at that so that we don't run over time. I'm trying to get you set up. Okay.
And it's just, right? Yeah, okay. Okay, cool, thank you. Okay, well, I'll get started and maybe finish a little bit early so we have time for Q&A. My name is Ian Carillo, and I'm a PhD candidate in development studies. I tend to focus on issues dealing with sociology, applied economics. So, unlike Giso's presentation, mine doesn't have people, but it does. It actually deals with 2 or 3 themes that Giso touched on, like PAC, and some of the way that Brazil's rapid growth has been putting very intense pressure on the environment and the people that live in areas like this. So, but I'll be